Okay, today I have the great pleasure of getting a chance to talk to somebody fairly new to me. His name is Jeremy Wentworth. He actually reached out to me after our recent podcast with Andrew Belt because he suggested that, hey, I'm doing some VCV Rack development and maybe you'd like a third party's view on what that's like. And then I kind of looked into his background and I realized it's not just VCV Rack. He does a lot of the stuff that I'm into, that all you listeners of mine are kind of into. He's one of us. But he's also a really busy dude. And so I wanted an opportunity to get a chance to talk to him about what he does. So with that, I'll shut up and let's talk to Mr. Wentworth. Hey Jeremy, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you, Darwin?
I'm great. Why don't we kick this off by having you tell us a little bit about the many different works that you do?
Basically, I'm inspired by a lot of the work by Daniel Schiffman, who does a lot of the processing community work, and he does the coding train videos on YouTube, which are great. He's a great teacher. So I studied a lot of his work, and he's got a great website and a book he's written. And I've read the processing book. I have it somewhere here in my room. But that's where I get a lot of my inspiration is from Daniel Schiffman and also Sam Aaron is another inspiration. So that's why I make these kind of like creative coding modules for VCV Rack. So that's where a lot of that, how I get a lot of my ideas for modules.
Yeah, can you remind everybody what it is, what moniker you go under with those modules?
Yeah, so I go by JW Modules. It's kind of a boring name, but and there was another guy, ML
Okay.
Martin Loader's modules. So I kind of copied him. I thought it was going to be a thing when we first started out,
Uh-huh.
but then everybody came up with cool names, and I didn't
Right.
have a cool name. So
Uh,
now I'm just GW modules.
I see. Interesting. Well, I was kind of intrigued when I first took a peek at what your modules did, and then once I started playing with them, because they remind me so much of they kind of fit in a class of things that are kind of like simple ideas that produce complex results, right?
And that definitely comes from Schiffman
Right.
because he was a huge inspiration on I love things that have these simple rules that generate complex results like the game of life.
Right.
Like in my note sequencer, there's a game of life.
Yeah.
I love I love the fact that it's just like counting neighbors and changing the cells. It's just like so simple, but it looks so cool.
Now everybody I know that is into the game of life has got like a different introduction. So for me, I was living in like Nose Pick, Wisconsin, and I got the book or Stephen Levy's book, Hackers. And I
Oh,
was
okay.
reading it, and it talked about how the MIT hackers kind of got into the game of life. And it blew my head open, and I ended up like I was doing a night shift computer job, and I would just like spend the whole night trying to make these crappy old computers play life. It became an obsession, right? What was your introduction to the game of life?
Man, I've just always known about it. I can't remember.
It's 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 always been in the ether, huh?
Yeah, I've just been coding my whole life, so I can't remember when I first learned about it. Probably a long time ago.
Now, when you say you've been coding your whole life, when did you first get started in that?
My parents bought me this VTech PC 2000. It's just like this little toy computer thing. They just recently gave it back to me for Christmas, which was nice. But it had one button on it, and I think I only hit. Well, it has tons of buttons, but it has a basic button.
Okay.
So I would hit basic and then write my own basic games into it. And it just has a one-line display, and I would just write dumb things in it. That was the beginning. That was probably when I was real little, maybe 10 years old or
Oh
so. I don't
wow.
remember.
Oh goodness.
But then I just became obsessed with basic and how, and then I used to just like use like the play command to do like the notes because you could make sound, and I was obsessed with that. And I liked using that over trackers because I can never figure out how to use trackers. So I just always loved programming because I could come up with simple things that would make noise or whatever, things that I was into.
Well, it's interesting you say it that way because it seems like when I talk to creative coders, and I would say that that is really, if there was a definition for you, that is at the heart of it.
I think so.
Yeah. When I talk to people who kind of self-identify as creative coders, I find that about half of them come to the creative from the coding side, and the other half come to the coding from the creative side, right? They were creative, they were drawing and stuff first, and then they started coding. It sounds to me
Yeah,
like you were a coding guy, and your head got opened up into doing more creative work
yeah,
with it.
yeah. So I think what that comes from is working at my day job and writing servers and front ends and Ember apps and Node servers and things that are just not that exciting. So then I would go home and watch Daniel Schiffman doing all this cool stuff and get inspired, and or Sam Aaron doing Sonic Pi stuff. I just get inspired by these people doing these cool things, and then want to make things that look cool and sound cool, and not just the boring servers and front ends and REST APIs and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Sure, I do. Now, now the thing that I'm curious about then is I mean, a lot of those people end up sort of getting there through academic means, right?
Yeah.
They're either in a art department or something that's open to the idea of code,
Yep. Yep.
or they're in a CS department that is into the idea of being a little artsy, right?
Yep.
But it sounds to me like you had coding chops and you just decided, damn it, I'm being an artist. Is that true,
That's
or am I missing a step?
that's that's kind of where I'm trying to go right now. I
Uh-huh.
want to be I want to be a creative coder, and I want this, I want to make this into something.
Got it.
I would like to work with people and come up with creative things. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm identifying myself as now. I just find it more satisfying to do creative coding and these VCV Rack modules that I've done, and I really try to treat VCV Rack as a blank canvas,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just painting on the canvas. I'm not trying to make it look like a Moog whatever filter. I'm not trying to make it look like I'm not trying to copy anybody. I'm trying to do my own thing and be creative.
Well, that's really clear because when I played around with your modules, a lot of them, I mean, they were influenced by things, but nothing that we've seen in the music industry. I mean, you have the one thing where it's sort of like jointed, uh, you know, j- arms that are connected by little joints, right?
It's a pendulums.
Oh yeah, that's it. But it reminded me of, different sort of like wacky web apps that I've seen over the years that would have these funky little animation things, right? And the point of those was always to say, "Hey, look at the funky thing I can do on my web page," right? But in
Right.
your case, they're generating control voltages and all this kind of stuff. They're using these complex movements, but instead of just looking cool, they look cool, but they're also actually uh, generating voltage changes that are useful for musical purposes.
Yeah, so the thing that's cool about VCV Rack is the fact that the voltages are just numbers. They're just floating point values. So another Leonardo Ruiz made he does volt modules. He made this one module called Caudal. I think that's how you say it. But it generates control voltages based on this pendulum. So what I did is I wanted to make a visual for his module.
Mm,
So I just took the angle outputs from his module and plugged them into my module, and then you can visualize what he is generating.
I see.
Um, or you can just take any four control voltages, plug them in, and just make it do all sorts of weird stuff, because it's all just floating point values from -5 to 5. So I can just take those numbers and make them angles and move those dots around and make it, and it sort of works like a pendulum. There are four pendulums.
Right, right.
So that's the cool thing about VCV Rack is it's just numbers. I don't have to, generate complex objects or, make a voltage factory or something like that. It just I just have numbers to play with, and it's so simple.
Right. Well, it's funny you say, I don't have to make a voltage factory because one of the things that I see sometimes is that people that are into creative coding are kind of given the sideways glance by, and I'm going to use quote marks here, like serious computer people, right? Serious
Yeah.
developers or serious
Yes.
programmers, because somehow there's this sense that if what you make is fun, it almost like by definition can't be rigorous or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm making a toy, and it was so easy to make this toy, or
Yeah.
I'm just being a goofball and making silly modules.
Yeah.
But really, these are like complex things, and they're fun to play with and fun to use. And I mean, especially the note sequencer I made. It's basically a port of a Max for Live device I made and a processing app I made, and I just combined those things and made this note sequencer that just like flips and rotates it and things you wouldn't normally do with a sequencer live. You wouldn't flip a sequence normally live, because
Right.
but then if you incorporate a quantizer into that, then you don't get these random notes that sound like crap. So this note sequencer that flips sequences, you can get really interesting things out of it that you wouldn't normally think to do.
Right. Well, I'm kind of
I don't know if that answers the question, but
it does. And the question I have though is given that your sort of like professional gig is doing these kind of heavy duty IT/CS kinds of things, what do you think of the world of creative code and how challenging is it for you? And secondly, how good of coders do you find yourself in the middle of?
I think it is a challenge, and I think that's why I like it. I like watching Daniel Schiffman, describe how to make an L system or something like that, and then think about, okay, or a recursive circle animation or something like that, and then think about, okay, how can I take that and take that even one step further, challenge myself to make something crazy, and then I'll do that. So I mean, it is, in a way it's difficult, but in a way it's, if you listen to him talk or read a book about processing, they're really just all based on simple concepts. And once you get those simple concepts, you can make things that look complex. So it's hard to really answer that because it's simple and complex in a way.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that. I have read that processing book, which is amazing because even in some of the early chapters with some of the like simplest of concepts, there's something really intriguing about saying, well, do this and like add these couple of lines, and now it makes this endless stream of multicolored lines, and you're just like,
Right.
wow, math never looked so good to me, right?
Yeah, that's the coolest part about it is I can just make a loop that makes some random transparent lines, but then the result looks so complex, but it's really just simple code. I mean, that's why it's hard to answer that question about is it hard or,
Right.
but I like to take those simple things and then join it with something else like a sine wave or a cosine. And once you figure those simple concepts out, you can put things together and, make those lines move around in a circle or something like that. It's taking these very, very simple rules, and once you understand those, joining them together.
Now, in your modules in particular, you actually go for a fairly graphics heavy design where a lot of the modules we see in VCV Rack tend to be very Eurorack like, I would say. In your
Yeah.
case, it's more like I've got a display stuck in the middle of my Eurorack. It's a different
Yes.
perspective. And I'm curious about your interaction with the VCV Rack world. I mean, first of all, do you get any do you get blowback like from customers saying, "Well, this doesn't look like anything I'd want," or
Yes.
oh
Yes.
yeah, really?
So Andrew got an email once about that, that said, please, your developers need to take a lesson from other software that looks like real hardware. We need to take a lesson and we need to do that. We need to follow real hardware. And Andrew sent me that email. How ridiculous is that? I mean, I'm trying to push the limits. I mean, when I found that Andrew was using this Nano VG library,
Hmm.
and I realized that it works basically like processing. I have a context and I can just do stuff on it.
Right.
Then my mind was just blown, and I thought, well, I can just do whatever I want then.
It's off to the races at that point, right?
Yeah. But I
Interesting.
mean, but there are people that are, hardcore, whatever, synth modular, Eurorack people that want things to look exactly like a certain module. But I don't really do that.
Well, it's interesting you say that because, I mean, what that points to is sort of like, it's not the actual definition of it, but I still tend to call these kind of things where it's almost Catholic, right? In that
Yep.
it's like so staid
Yep.
and so set in its ways, and you
Yeah.
can't change it because from their perspective, their view of the world is what God gave them, right?
Yep. Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's a good analogy. But the nice thing is the VCV Rack community is just so amazing. Like people ask like, well, should I use Soft 2 modular or what? I don't know
Right.
much about that, but or VCV Rack. Well, the best feature of VCV Rack is the community,
Yeah.
and these people are amazing, and they don't care if it looks like a Eurorack module or a Moog filter or whatever. They they just love the fact that we're putting these free things out there for them to play with, and they look cool and they're fun, and they can make YouTube videos. And I enjoy watching my dumb little wavehead logo bounce up and
Right.
down,
Right.
because it's just control voltage. They can just take some output from whatever they're doing in their song and plug it into my wavehead module and just watch it bounce up and down. It's just like it's so silly and people love it. So I think that's the best part, is that I don't really care about these people that are Catholic about synthesizers,
Right.
because the VCV Rack community is so good.
It's interesting you mentioned the Wavehead module because I'm actually looking at the like animated thing on your GitHub page right now,
Me
which has
too.
got okay, which has got one of the little Wavehead modules in there. It's kind of interesting because you have like this very personal logo that was created. What's this? Is there a story behind that?
I created it like 10 years ago as just my dream. This is what I want to do. I want to be into I want to build synths or design synths or modules or make music. This is just my creative outlet. This is my logo that I've been using for about 10 years for all my music, all my software, everything. And it's got the wave in my head as just my dream, and then it also is a J and a W, which a lot of people don't even notice.
Oh, I didn't.
Um,
I see it now. I didn't even notice it until you just said that.
but it's got the J kind of to the left and the
Right.
W in the middle.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's just a fun logo I made a long time ago in Paint.net or something, a long time ago, because I just loved that program. It was so easy to use.
That's hilarious. So in doing the development of this stuff, what's kind of your process? First of all, I mean, so it sounds like what you do is you kind of take inspiration from other systems you either developed or you've seen, and then you kind of bring it to the VCV rack world and find a way to implement it there. That can be kind of hard because max patches have a certain kind of layout that don't necessarily map to a Eurorack type layout. Similarly with reactor patches, and it's certainly similar with processing patches or processing programs. How do you kind of make the transition from one genre to another? How does that work for you?
Sometimes I take inspiration from people that post in the VCV Rack community, like wondering about if they could have a certain type of module or something is missing, but I mean, designing the modules is designing the UI is actually very difficult, because there's so many things I could do. So many, you just have to draw lines in the sand and say, no, I'm gonna make it work like this, and then you actually stop coding and then play with it, and then think, okay, well, what is it missing? And then go back to coding. But designing these UIs is so difficult. I mean, I joke with other developers that it takes up like 75% of the time trying to figure out how to lay out these knobs and buttons, and I mean, it's pretty difficult. And then as you're laying them out, you're thinking, "Oh, I missed this parameter that we need because is useful." You know, it's tough to design these modules, but once you start drawing lines in the sand and then you start playing with it, you eventually kind of narrow it down to a few useful parameters, and then you just show it to people and then see what they think. And then if they think it looks good, you know, then go with it. Or if they think, oh, you're missing this, and that, then I make it better. Like the bouncy ball. It started out with one ball bouncing around, and then Leonardo Ruiz, who does Vault modules, he's like, well, you should do four balls bouncing around. And then he's like, well, you should add a paddle too,
Right.
because then it adds a little bit more chaos to the
Yeah.
ball bouncing. And so they all just kind of evolve, and then you just draw lines and finish them out. Give yourself a deadline.
One of the things I really got a kick out of when I interviewed Andrew Belt, who designed this
Yeah.
thing, was he kind of like right up front, he sort of admitted, he was like, I'm kind of a stubborn guy. And
Yeah.
so I take ideas, and if I want to go with them, I'll do it. But if not, you can't talk me into it, right?
Yep.
And I realize that that is kind of that's an important way to have almost like an artistic statement
Yep.
about your coding practice, right?
I completely agree with that. I'm very stubborn. You know, if with my text editor and my terminal, and I'm very stubborn with how things work and you know my requirements. Like sometimes I use Visual Studio Code, but I don't like how it formats the code, so I never format the code. But I usually use Sublime Text and iTerm too, and I'm very set in my ways on the tools I use. It's hard to sway me to use other tools. But yeah, stubbornness is good. You have to draw lines and be able to tell people no, because people ask for all kinds of features, but they don't realize that if you add every knob in CV control that they want, the module will just fill up the whole screen. I mean,
Right.
you got to be stubborn.
Yeah, so but that actually brings up the point though. Then do you ever put the thing out there and then say, "Oh, you know what? I really wish I had done X,
Yes.
but now it's too
So
late."
yes. So for the past couple modules, that's actually helped me a lot. I post a video of it, and people will say, "Well, you're missing this," or "I wish it could do this." Like the note sequencer,
Hmm.
it has this polyphony thing, and then I realized, well, when you're doing that, it would be nice if you could draw in MIDI notes and then not worry about the polyphony, but just line it up, correspond the bottom row to the bottom row, and you know, make a drum beat
Right.
without worrying about the polyphony. But I
Sure.
didn't think about that until after I posted the video in the group, and someone asked me about making a drum beat or something. So then I added that in. But so what I've decided to do is show people the module, but you don't have to listen to everything they say.
Right.
Just take the things that you think it really needs or it's missing, and then go with that and then finish it out. And usually I do that within a day or so after showing people.
Right. Well, that's kind of an interesting way to do software development, but maybe it's also one of the luxuries of working inside a VCV rack. Since you're not providing everything, you're just kind of like providing one really focused function. You can start off with just showing people a video, not letting them play with the actual program, your part of the program at all, but they'll be familiar enough with the whole environment that they'll be able to focus on your one thing and give you maybe useful information.
Exactly. And that's the great thing about the community is they see right away. As soon as I post a module, they get it. They see the inputs, they know that they can plug anything they want into that input. Or they see that they could make, you know, with the note sequencer, they see what they could do with it, and then they offer up various crazy opinions like making it Tetris inside there, which I actually do want to do,
Uh,
but someday I'll
right.
just have a Tetris mode and then flip to that, like just like the life button. But I also have keep notes. I mean, so part of being stubborn is I can say no and then add it to my notes and then do it someday or not. After so many years of coding, I've just learned that all the input is good, but I don't need to listen to all of it.
Sure. Sure.
I can just take notes.
Interesting.
So I just have like all these text files of notes, ideas that people give me, to dos, whatever, just keep notes. I think that's the biggest thing that helps me.
Sure. So now you talked about how you kind of got started coding with this VTech computer with the basic button, and that was kind of your entree. But fill me in a little bit more on your background. Both, how did you get to be more skilled as a programmer, but then also when did the music come into play?
That's a good question. The music, I guess the music was started first. When I was even younger than 10, I guess, I would have been maybe 5. My dad was the sound guy for the church. And it was a private Christian school church.
Mm-hmm.
So every Sunday, we would go in and set up the band, set up the mics, get the instruments out, plug in all the cables into the mixer, get the tape deck ready to record, and then we would sit there and record everything that the band was playing. It was actually a big band. It was a nice band. And then at the end, we would tear everything down. So I would, wrap the wires around my arm and pile them all up, put everything away, unplug everything, get the tape out of the tape deck that we recorded and all that. So that's really where my music background comes from. I was just fascinated by that mixer and the tape deck, and I just wanted that for myself. And that's where I sent you that recording from when I was real little,
Yeah.
where I wanted to be a producer from that very young age.
Well, it's funny though. So what year roughly would that have been? What years roughly?
That one would have been like 86 or so.
Okay. So what was the music industry back then was certainly different from what it is now, and
Oh, yeah.
especially in terms of its interaction with technology, right?
Yeah. My dad was always into computers and programming and things
Oh,
like that. So we had computers my whole life, and I was always into BASIC and C and always trying to see what I can make the computer do.
mm-hmm.
And then I went to high school, and they had a C++ class in high school, actually, which I don't know of any high schools that have that.
I was gonna
Um,
say that's pretty heady stuff.
yeah, and then I went to college for a couple years at DeVry for programming and just didn't finish there. And I think that's really what drives me today is the fact that I did not finish school. So I was obsessed with learning everything possible. So that kind of tells you how my technology career has been. I was just always obsessed with music and code and how I can join the two.
Right. Well, it's interesting though. I didn't actually get my college degree until much later in life, and the reason was that. But what I would say, and when people would ask, I would say, well, I actually paid for my education differently. I paid for it with time and books and gear that I would learn inside and out. It's a different kind of education, but I think one that when the rubber hits the road actually is equally valid.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I pushed myself so hard because I don't have a degree. I would study Schiffman and, Dead Mouse and people that were my heroes just because I wanted to learn how do they do it. What do other people know that I don't know? And I would just push myself so hard, probably too hard, and probably got myself too stressed out recently. But that but that's beside the point.
Well, but that does bring up a question, which is, in the end, you have first of all this like heavy drive, right? But you also clearly have interests in a lot of different areas, whether it's educating yourself more in either programming or art, whether it's working within some of these communities, whether it's learning more about some of these programming languages, or just making music. You've got your fingers in a lot of stuff. How do you manage to balance that? And is it like one thing drives you crazy for a while and then you jump and do another thing, or are you trying to juggle everything all at once?
It's a lot of everything. So sometimes for a while there I was obsessed with Sonic Pi, and I would just sit there and try to figure out what can I make this do? What kind of crazy things can I fit inside a tweet or something like that?
Hmm.
And just be obsessed with that for months. And then I think he had a break in the development or something. Recently, he was having some struggles of his own, and I just kind of got out of it. And then VCV Rack came along, and Andrew didn't have an LFO in the first version, so I changed the VCO minimum value to make it slower.
Hmm.
And then everything started cascading downhill from there. And I just started you know what I mean? It's just, and now I'm obsessed with VCV Rack. Um, so yes, it does kind of go in spurts where I'll be obsessed with one thing for a few months and then move on to the next thing. But then I never really forget. I don't ever forget and move on. I kind of always go back to things once in a while. Like
Sure.
he'll release a new version of Sonic Pi. I think he just released a new version today or something. So maybe I'll go back and play with that for a while. Or Ableton, they just released the beta.
Hmm.
So I'll go play with the wavetable synth.
Right.
I kind of just follow everything, and sometimes I stress myself out too much trying to keep up with everything. And there's just every single day there's just so many cool things released, and I just want to know everything. I want to play with everything. I'm just like a little kid playing with all these toys.
Right. What is sort of like the Melville white whale? What is your Moby Dick moment, right? What is the thing that you really want to learn that you maybe don't have yet?
DSP.
Yeah.
I want to be better at DSP. I got some recommendations from Michael Hetrick, who you had on recently,
Hmm.
and he recommended a book to read. So I'm going to read that and research
What
more.
book was it?
He recommended the book called Designing Audio Effect Plugins in C++.
Oh yeah, okay. Oh, that's a great book.
So I want to read that, and I want to get better at DSP. I want to, make crazy buffer effects or something like that. Because I'm really inspired by Michael Hetrick too. He makes the greatest plugins.
Yeah.
He's such a cool guy. He's been helping me recently, giving me pointers on what I should learn, what I should look into. Maybe I can make VSTs in the future, make some money off that. I don't know, but he's such an inspiration to me. I've been following him since the beginning.
Interesting.
When he released the Sandman
Yeah.
thing.
Boy, Sandman
Before,
caught a lot of people's attention. That was such an
yeah,
amazing piece of work.
the fact that you can mess with the buffer with the start and end points, and I was following him since before the Plugin Alliance and all that stuff, and I just love what he does. So I'm very inspired by him too.
I mean, one of the things you talk a lot about is community, and how one of the real draws to you is the community that you get to work within. First of all, when you talk about the VCV Rack community, where exactly are you talking about?
The Facebook group,
Oh, okay. All right.
that that's everything.
Interesting.
So there's just tons of people on there posting constantly, like videos of things they made, and then also the amazing thing is you have a bunch of developers also in the group.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know any other piece of software where you have a Facebook group where you have maybe 50 developers in the group and all the users in the group making videos with their modules, and you just have this feedback loop that's amazing.
Right.
And I that's like my favorite part of the community is this Facebook group and the feedback loop you get. And I think the users love it, and I think the developers love it.
So you have kind of put yourself out there, and especially in the VCV Rack community, you're out there doing some really innovative work. But you also talk about at some point, trying to get in getting paid or whatever. But the communities in the paid software world are a little different than what you get in the open source community, right?
Yeah,
How
I mean, so
how do you bridge that kind of almost emotional gap?
it's tough. It's very tough. I mean, I talk with other developers about it too. Should I charge for my next module? Should I not? I mean, I love these people. I don't want to make them give me. I don't want to charge them too much money. It's tough. I mean, I started a Patreon. I accept donations through PayPal, and then maybe I'll put some more work into some new modules and maybe charge a little bit for them.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, it's so tough because I really like these people and I don't want to. The whole thing is of VCV Rack is it was free right off the bat. That's why so many people got into it because they didn't have to pay $200 for an oscillator or
Right,
something.
right,
I think if I charge for modules in the future, it's going to be cheap. I'm thinking like iOS apps,
right.
things that are easy for people to spend money on, not things that will break the bank and then put people off.
Sure. Now, one of the things you talked about when you were developing it, and this goes beyond your love of programming, and this also goes beyond your enjoyment in making music. You talked about when you would be developing and you'd be like showing early versions of a module or something. You talked about how you like to play it, kind of get some of your first refinements by playing it yourself, right? And then
Yeah.
by having other people watch you play it, they'll come up with more refinement options, right?
Yes.
I'm curious if you imagine ever taking some of these things once they hit a certain point of refinement, would you ever consider actually moving them into hardware? Or are you a software guy? I mean, do you have a hardware modular that you use, or are you really focused on the software side?
I have a hardware modular system in front of me right now. I have some modules, Eurorack modules. I have the Moog Mother 32 and the No Coast, and
Mm-hmm.
then some other synths I have. I just have a room in the basement here full of synths, um, and just tape machines and tons of different keyboards that I've had, just tons of stuff that people give me and things that I buy. I'm just obsessed with gear. But yeah, hardware. It's funny you asked that because people are currently working on hardware in our VCV Rack group and taking some modules from VCV Rack and putting them into hardware. So that's happening, and yes, I want to do that. And it's already happening. So it'll probably happen within the next year or two that somebody will release a hardware module from VCV Rack.
Sure. It makes actually a lot of sense because one of the things that is devastating, and if you ever talk to a hardware developer that had kind of a design failure, you'll talk to someone who just really has a sense of being defeated, right? There's
Yeah.
something about going through the whole process of making hardware, and then all of a sudden you find out it's got a
Yes.
fatal
Yes.
flaw that's just such a beatdown, right? It seems
Yeah.
like one of the things that VCV Rack does, it gives you the opportunity to first of all test out concepts and get a whole lot of people to try it, but not to do that in a way that either forces your hands with what your hardware has to be like exactly.
Yeah.
And you get it super refined before you even have to pay anybody to do anything.
Yeah. I mean, you could use VCV Rack as like a design tool
Right.
and try it out. And refine it in there and see what people like, what they don't like. Do I actually need this knob? Because in the hardware world, this knob is going to cost me a lot of money. Something
Right.
like that.
Right.
But yeah, you could use it like that. I could see that.
Well, I'm curious then if I mean it just seems like you have a lot of plans. What are the next things we're going to see coming from you that you can talk about?
Well, I'm working with this band called Strike, which is Ted Palas, and he's the guy that wrote the CDM, the Create Digital Music article about VCV Rack,
Okay.
the first and the second one.
All right.
And he's starting a band called Strike, and I want to work with him a lot. Working on a set of modules where you can set a more precise BPM and do beat matching, because he runs 4 decks of vinyl into VCV Rack, and he wants to beat match with VCV Rack, but he needs very precise BPM.
Sure.
And I'm not a beat matcher. He's been explaining this thing to me, and what he wanted, and we're going to design some modules, and there's going to be a pack that we will release hopefully soon.
That's cool. Well, it's funny you mention that, though, because like the whole pack release mechanism seems to be one of those things that's kind of still really in flux. Is there other parts of working with VCV Rack that are a little frustrating because the fact that it's still kind of changing a lot every day?
Yes. So Andrew is not afraid to change the API at all.
Yeah.
He good. I mean, that's good. He's stubborn, and he wants it to be right. He wants it to be a good API. So he'll tweak the API whenever he feels like it, and then when he's about ready to release the next version, then we have to change. We have to
Right.
change our code.
Right.
It's not like VST where it's pretty stable, and you know it is what it is.
Yeah.
Andrew's not afraid to change the API at all.
That's funny. Have you ever gotten like really have things like busted on you as a result?
Well, this one time I was going to change a module for James Bernard because it was all red and he's colorblind.
Mm.
And so I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. I just change the color and recompile it. That's so easy. But then I realized the code was written in an old version for VCV Rack. So I had to go through and rewrite the whole thing and do an update and update all, to the new API,
Mm-hmm.
and then recompile it and give it to. So that was just one silly thing I ran into. I thought it was going to be such an easy project to change a color,
Right.
but then I ended up upgrading all the code to the next version.
Well, Jeremy, I can't believe it, but we've already blown through our time. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I know you've got a lot of irons in the fire. From a non-code standpoint, when are you going to be putting out some more music?
I don't know. I get inspiration at random times.
Yeah.
Maybe when I get some free time. I mean, I've got 2 kids. My best time to work is at night when after they go to bed.
Right.
So I don't know. The last thing I did was for the VCV Rack compilation, Volume 1.
Uh-huh.
I have a song on there, and I like that one a lot.
Cool. Jeremy, thanks again so much for taking the time. It's been really interesting talking to you and interesting to hear about how you think about, kind of like attacking problems and attacking design but also creating it rather than just creating a design, actually building an instrument. That's really inspiring. I really appreciate it, and I really look forward to the next things that you put out, man.
Well, I thank you for spending some time with me and looking at all the things that I've done, and I look forward to future conversations, hopefully.
Well, that sounds great. We will talk again soon then. With that, I'll say goodbye.
All right, goodbye.
Bye. Well, many thanks to Jeremy for going through all that stuff. It was a lot of fun kind of surfing all over his creative life. Thank you so much as listeners for showing up every week, hanging out, taking a listen to whoever we are talking to. We have a lot more cool stuff in the future. Look forward to sharing it with you. With that, I'm going to say goodbye. Thanks.